Some people believe that the greatest battles are fought on grand stages, for high stakes that shape nations. I've come to learn that sometimes the most important battles are the intensely personal ones, fought over something as simple as the right to enjoy a quiet weekend at a lake cabin without being harassed. My war wasn't fought with armies, but with plat maps, county records, and a healthy dose of strategic spite. And it all started because my wife, Sarah, had the audacity to not order a complete stranger a cheeseburger. Have you ever had someone push you so far that your only option was to systematically, legally, and publicly dismantle their entire world using nothing but their own arrogance as the fulcrum? It's a uniquely satisfying experience, and if you've ever dealt with a petty tyrant in your own life, you're going to love this story. It began on a perfect Saturday afternoon, the kind of day that makes owning a small cabin on Lakeview Point feel like the smartest decision I'd ever made. Sarah was on our deck, reading a book, basking in the sun. I was inside, putting the finishing touches on a marinade for the steaks we were grilling for dinner. It was peaceful. It was our sanctuary. Then, the illusion of tranquility was shattered by a voice, sharp and imperious, cutting through the calm air from the neighboring property. "Excuse me, you, over there, I see you have a phone." My wife looked up, startled, to see a woman standing on the edge of her meticulously manicured lawn, hands on her hips, with a scowl that could curdle milk. This was Beatrice Cromwell, the self-appointed queen and iron-fisted president of the Lakeview Covenants Association. We'd had minimal interaction with her, mostly just receiving her passive-aggressive monthly newsletters about approved lawn ornamentation and the correct shade of beige for mailbox posts. Sarah, ever polite, offered a hesitant, "Hello, can I help you?" Beatrice gestured impatiently. "I'm having guests arrive shortly, and my phone has died. I need to place a catering order from the Dockside Grill. You'll need to call it in for me. I'll have the deluxe cheeseburger platter with extra onion rings and a garden salad with ranch. Tell them it's for Cromwell at Lot 12. Sarah stared, utterly baffled. It wasn't a request, it was a command, delivered with the casual authority of a monarch addressing a servant. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, her brow furrowed. "I'm in the middle of something. Their number is in the local directory if you need to use our landline later." Beatrice's face tightened, the pleasant mask of neighborhood authority dropping to reveal raw, entitled indignation. "I don't have time for that. I need it ordered now." "Are you refusing to assist a neighbor?" Before Sarah could even process the bizarre accusation, Beatrice escalated. "You know, there are clauses in our bylaws about community cooperation. This attitude is very unbecoming of a Lakeview resident." Sarah, bless her heart, simply said, "I'm not ordering your lunch for you," and turned back to her book, effectively ending the conversation. We thought that was it. An absurd, laughable encounter. Oh, how wrong we were. 45 minutes later, as the scent of my marinade began to fill the kitchen, the crunch of tires on our gravel driveway announced new arrivals. Not Beatrice's guests, but a county sheriff's patrol car. Its lights off, but its presence deafeningly official. 2 deputies stepped out, looking profoundly unenthusiastic. I stepped outside, my heart pounding with confusion. The lead deputy sighed. "Sir, we received a 911 call from a Ms. Cromwell next door. She's alleging a disturbance and claims your wife was creating a hostile environment and refusing to render aid in an emergency." I stared at him, dumbfounded. A 911 call? For what emergency? Not ordering her a cheeseburger? The deputy's expression was a masterclass in professional exhaustion. He'd heard it all. "She claimed she was feeling faint and needed sustenance, and that your wife's refusal constituted a reckless disregard for her safety. It was the most ludicrous, malicious abuse of emergency services I had ever heard of." They took our statement, spoke to a still fuming Beatrice, and left with a few words of weary advice about trying to get along with neighbors. But as I watched the patrol car disappear down the lane, a cold, clear determination settled over me. This wasn't about a cheeseburger anymore. This was about a woman so drunk on her minor sliver of power that she felt entitled to weaponize law enforcement over a petty whim. This was an abuse of power that could not be allowed to stand. What Beatrice Cromwell didn't know, what no one in the Lakeview Covenants Association knew, was that my day job wasn't nearly as quiet as my weekend demeanor. I am a senior geospatial analyst for the Department of the Interior. My entire career is built on understanding boundaries, rules, historical records, and the fine print that people like her love to ignore. She had just declared war on the one man in this entire community who could draw her a map to her own destruction. And I was going to make sure she followed it all the way to the end. The departure of the sheriff's deputies left a toxic silence in its wake. The idyllic afternoon was ruined, replaced by a simmering mixture of anger and disbelief. Sarah was shaken. She's a kind, non-confrontational person, and the idea that a neighbor would call the police on her especially for something so patently absurd was deeply unsettling. Her sanctuary had been violated, not by a crime, but by a malignant sense of entitlement that was somehow worse. My first instinct was to handle it like a rational adult. I waited until the next morning, giving myself time to cool down and formulate a calm, neighborly approach. I walked over to Beatrice's property line, finding her meticulously tending to a bed of prize-winning roses that sat near her perfectly constructed, rather ostentatious gazebo. She saw me coming and straightened up, her expression one of smug triumph. "Here to apologize for your wife's shocking behavior, are you?" she asked, stripping a leaf from a rose stem with a vindictive little tug. I kept my voice level. "Beatrice, I think we need to talk about what happened yesterday. Calling 911 is for emergencies. You tied up a valuable resource and put my wife through a stressful ordeal over a lunch order. That was completely out of line." She actually scoffed, a sound like air leaking from a punctured tire. "Out of line? My dear man, it is you who are out of line. The covenants of this association are built on the principle of a harmonious community. Your wife's refusal to offer a simple courtesy was disruptive and unneighborly. I felt threatened by her hostility. I have a delicate constitution." She placed a hand on her chest for dramatic effect. I could feel my blood pressure rising, but I held my ground. A delicate constitution doesn't give you the right to misuse emergency services. That's a serious issue, Beatrice. People can be fined for that. Her eyes narrowed into slits. "Are you threatening me? I am the president of this association. I am the one who upholds the standards here. You and your wife would do well to remember that. You are renters, are you not? Or weekenders, at least. You don't have the same investment in this community as those of us who maintain its integrity year-round." I corrected her. "We own our cabin, we pay our dues, and we have every right to be here and to not be harassed." She smiled, a thin, predatory smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We'll see about that. I suggest you read the bylaws you agreed to when you purchased your little shack. You'll find I have broad discretion to enforce community standards. Now, if you'll excuse me, my roses require my attention." She turned her back on me, a clear and final dismissal. The conversation was over. My attempt at a reasonable resolution had failed spectacularly. It had only served to reinforce her belief that she was untouchable. 2 days later, the next phase of her attack arrived in our mailbox. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope bearing the official letterhead of the Lakeview Covenants Association. Inside was a formal notice of violation. It cited a litany of vague infractions. Section 7, Paragraph B, Conduct unbecoming a member. Section 9, Paragraph D, Failure to promote community harmony. And my personal favorite, Section 12, Paragraph A, Creation of a hostile environment. The letter, penned and signed by Beatrice, of course, detailed a completely fabricated version of the incident, painting Sarah as an aggressive and uncooperative antagonist. The letter concluded by levying a $500 fine against us and informing us that any further disruptive incidents would result in a doubling of the fine and a formal motion for sanctions at the annual HOA meeting. It was a declaration of war, written on expensive stationery. This was her doubling down. She wasn't just a bully. She was a meticulous one. She was using the very rules of the community as her weapon, twisting them into a cudgel to beat us into submission. The fine was insulting, but the principle behind it was infuriating. She was creating a paper trail of her own lies. building a case against us within the very system she controlled. As I stood there, holding that letter, my frustration finally crystallized into cold, hard resolve. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was motivated. Beatrice Cromwell thought she was a master of rules and regulations. She thought her position as HOA president made her judge, jury, and executioner. She was about to find out what happens when a bureaucrat who runs a bake sale goes up against a federal analyst who maps floodplains, navigates decades of convoluted land use law, and unearths long-buried government survey errors for a living. She wanted to play a game of rules? Fine, we'd play. But we wouldn't be playing by her interpretation. We'd be playing by the real ones, the ones recorded in ink and etched onto survey maps for the last 100 years. That evening, I didn't marinate steaks. I booted up my work-grade laptop, connected to my private server, and began to build a file. Project code name, Cromwell. It was time to go to work. My office at home is my command center. It's equipped with multiple monitors, a high-speed fiber connection, and access to an array of public and proprietary databases that would make a county clerk weep with envy. This is where I untangle the messy, overlapping jurisdictions of federal, state, and local land management. For Beatrice Cromwell, I was about to turn that entire arsenal loose on her little lakeside kingdom. My first step was to download the complete, unedited Articles of Incorporation, covenants, conditions, restrictions, CCRs, and bylaws for the Lakeview Covenants Association. I didn't just skim them, I consumed them. I read every line, every clause, every amendment, no matter how archaic or seemingly irrelevant. I was looking for the same thing I always look for in dense legal documents: loopholes, contradictions, and procedural requirements that people in power, especially those who inherit it, often forget or ignore. I cross-referenced the dates of amendments with the official meeting minutes, which I also requested from the HOA's designated secretary, a nervous-looking man named Arthur who seemed terrified of Beatrice. It was tedious, painstaking work, but patterns began to emerge. Beatrice's tenure as president was marked by a steady consolidation of power into her own hands, often through vaguely worded amendments passed with low turnout at poorly advertised meetings. She was a master of the bureaucratic sneak attack, but that was just the appetizer. The main course was the land itself. Beatrice's power and authority stemmed from the CCRs, which applied to the specific geography of the Lakeview development. But what exactly was that geography? I pulled up the official county plat map for our subdivision, recorded in 1968. It was a simple, hand-drawn document showing the lots, the shared access roads, and the designated common areas. Then, using my Geographic Information System, GIS software, I began to layer. First came the 1968 plat. Then, I overlaid a high-resolution modern aerial photograph of the community. I geo-rectified the image, stretching and pinning it digitally until it aligned perfectly with the old map's property corners and landmarks. The lots, for the most part, lined up. Our little cabin, Lot 17, was exactly where it should be. Beatrice's sprawling house on Lot 12 was also in place. But then I started adding more layers. I pulled topographical data from the U.S. Geological Survey, showing the elevation contours and, crucially, the original shoreline of the lake before the dam was raised slightly in the 1970s. I added a layer showing state-designated wetlands and conservation zones. Then came the historical data. I delved into the county archives, digitally accessing survey records that predated the Lakeview development. I was looking for prior claims, easements, or rights-of-way that might still be legally in effect. Most of it was boilerplate stuff, old logging access roads that had been formally abandoned. But then I found it. It was a dusty, scanned document from 1952, 16 years before Lakeview was even a twinkle in a developer's eye. It was an easement granted by the original landowner, a farmer named Silas White, to the regional power company. It was a standard utility easement, granting the company the right to run power lines. But it was the other part of the document that made my pulse quicken. Tacked onto the utility easement was a secondary clause, a public access recreation easement. It designated a 20-foot wide corridor running from the old county road. straight down to the lake's original high water mark, intended to ensure local residents could always get to the water to fish or launch small boats. The easement was permanent and runs with the land, meaning it remained in effect no matter who owned the property. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I plotted the exact legal description from the 1952 document onto my digital map. It started at an old oak tree mentioned in the survey, an oak tree that was still standing. The line ran southwest, following a compass bearing of 220 degrees. I watched as my software drew a straight, unwavering line across the map. It cut across the corner of Lot 14. It clipped the edge of Lot 13. And then it sliced directly, perfectly, and catastrophically through the middle of Lot 12. The line went straight through Beatrice Cromwell's award-winning rose garden. It passed under the north corner of her expensive, custom-built gazebo. It continued right across her perfectly manicured lawn, ending at the shoreline right where she liked to sit in her Adirondack chair and scowl at passing boats. Beatrice Cromwell, the woman who lived and breathed rules, whose entire identity was wrapped up in enforcing the microscopic regulations of the HOA, had built her personal sanctuary in blatant violation of a legally recorded public right-of-way. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. This was the aha moment. This was the critical vulnerability I had been searching for. She had weaponized a vague community harmony clause against my wife. I had just found a permanent, legally binding 1952 easement that invalidated the centerpiece of her property. Her violation wasn't subjective or open to interpretation by an HOA board she controlled. It was a matter of public record, enforceable by the county. She had brought a pocket knife to a bazooka fight, and she didn't even know it. A slow, satisfied smile spread across my face. The investigation phase was over. Now, the strategy phase could begin, and I was going to build a plan as meticulous and unassailable as the maps spread across my screens. The discovery of the public easement was the skeleton key, but a key is useless without a plan for the lock it opens. My goal wasn't just to expose Beatrice's hypocrisy in a fit of righteous anger. That would be fleeting. No, my objective was more ambitious: to use this discovery to completely dismantle her authority, liberate the community from her petty tyranny, and ensure she could never again harass anyone over something as trivial as a cheeseburger. It required a multi-pronged strategy built on precision, patience, and a deep understanding of her psychology. Beatrice's greatest weakness was her arrogance. She believed she was the ultimate authority, that her interpretation of the rules was the only one that mattered. My plan, therefore, would be to create a situation where she would publicly and officially walk headfirst into a trap of her own making. I divided the plan into 3 phases: documentation, baiting, and confrontation. Phase 1. Documentation. I couldn't just show up to a meeting with a story about an old map. I needed to build an ironclad, professional-grade case that would be indisputable to any rational person. I spent the next week transforming my raw data into a compelling narrative. I created a series of presentation-quality maps. Map 1 showed the original 1952 easement overlaid on the undeveloped land. Map 2 showed the 1968 subdivision plat, conspicuously omitting the prior easement common developer oversight. Map 3 was the kill shot, a modern, high-resolution satellite image of Beatrice's property with a 20-foot wide easement corridor shaded in bright red, clearly bisecting her garden and gazebo. To bolster this, I drove to the county seat. I spent a day in the records office getting certified copies of the 1952 easement and the 1968 plat map. A certified copy isn't just a photocopy. It's a legal document, stamped and sealed by the county clerk, attesting to its authenticity. I also filed a Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, request with the county's Planning and Zoning Department for any and all permits related to the construction of structures on Lot 12. As I suspected, there was a permit for the house, but nothing on file for a gazebo or major landscaping. It was likely built without the proper county oversight, another nail in her coffin. While I was gathering my ammunition, I initiated the second part of this phase: quiet reconnaissance. I started taking evening walks around the neighborhood, striking up casual conversations with other residents. I didn't mention my plan, I just listened. It turned out that Sarah and I weren't the only ones on the receiving end of Beatrice's reign. There was George from Lot 4, who was fined because his grandchildren's tricycle was left on his driveway for more than 24 hours. There was the Miller family on Lot 9, who received a nasty letter because their wind chimes were deemed sonically intrusive. My favorite was poor Arthur, the HOA secretary, who admitted over a beer that Beatrice had forced the board to deny his request to build a small, tasteful tool shed because it was 2 inches too close to his property line, citing the need for absolute adherence to setback regulations. The irony was staggering. Beatrice was a tyrant of inches while her own gazebo was sitting on yards of public land. I now had allies, whether they knew it yet or not. Their stories provided the context, the proof that her abuse of power was a pattern, not an isolated incident. Phase 2. Baiting the trap. With my evidence compiled, it was time to poke the bear. I couldn't let her know what I had. Instead, I had to make her publicly double down on her authority regarding property boundaries. I drafted a formal letter to the Lakeview Covenants Association Architectural Review Committee, of which Beatrice was, naturally, the chairperson. The letter was a masterpiece of feigned ignorance and malicious compliance. I wrote that, in the spirit of community harmony and absolute adherence to regulations, I was planning some minor landscaping near my property line with Lot 16. Before proceeding, I humbly requested that the committee provide a certified survey or official confirmation of the exact boundary markers for my property to ensure I did not inadvertently encroach on common areas or neighboring lots. It was a perfectly reasonable request, but it was designed to do one thing: force Beatrice's hand. I was asking her, in her official capacity, to make a statement about the supreme importance of property lines and official surveys. To add a little spice, I concluded the letter by referencing the violation notice she sent me, stating, "Given the association's recent and laudable focus on strict compliance, as evidenced by citation V2023-14 issued against my property, I wish to proceed with the utmost caution and respect for the covenants." I sent the letter via certified mail, so I would have a receipt of her signature. Her response, which came a week later, was everything I had hoped for. It was condescending, dismissive, and utterly self-incriminating. "Mr. Stevens," she wrote, "the boundaries of the lots in Lakeview are clearly defined by the official 1968 plat map on file with the county. It is the homeowner's sole responsibility to be aware of and respect these boundaries. The association is not responsible for providing individual surveys. Any encroachment, no matter how minor, will be met with immediate fines and sanctions, as our community's integrity depends on the unwavering enforcement of these rules. Your sudden interest in strict compliance is noted." She had taken the bait, hook, line, and sinker. She had, in writing, confirmed that the 1968 plat was the sole governing document, that unwavering enforcement was her policy, and that any encroachment was a major offense. She had no idea that the 1968 plat was a house of cards, and she had just handed me the written confirmation I needed to blow it down. I filed her letter away with the rest of my evidence. The trap was set. All that was left was Phase 3, confrontation. The annual HOA meeting was in 2 weeks. It was time to prepare my presentation. Beatrice thought she was the queen, presiding over her court. She had no idea she was about to become the star defendant in a public trial she didn't even know was happening. With all my evidence gathered and Beatrice's self-incriminating letter secured, the final stage of my strategy began. Preparing for the public execution, the annual HOA meeting was the perfect venue. It was her stage, her throne room, where she felt most powerful, surrounded by the residents she ruled over. This year, however, the script was going to be different. I didn't want to just win. I wanted to create a moment of such undeniable public clarity that her authority would evaporate on the spot. I spent my evenings rehearsing my presentation. I wasn't just going to read facts. I was going to tell a story. The story of our community, a story she thought she was the author of, but in which she was only a minor, corrupted character. I condensed my complex GIS data into a simple, visually compelling PowerPoint presentation. I knew most of my neighbors weren't versed in legal jargon or surveying, so I used bright colors, clear labels, and dramatic before and after animations. The slow reveal of the red easement corridor sliding over the satellite image of her pristine garden was particularly satisfying. I also prepared a handout for every attendee. It was a single, double-sided sheet. On one side was a simplified map showing the public easement across Lot 12. On the other side was a list of key exhibits, a copy of my certified mail receipt for my clarification letter, a transcript of her dismissive response, and a side-by-side comparison of the bylaws she used to deny Arthur his shed and the clear violation her gazebo represented. I was arming the entire community with the same facts I had. During this time, Beatrice seemed to grow even more brazen. Oblivious to the storm gathering just over her perfectly landscaped horizon, she sent out another community-wide newsletter. This one was a thinly veiled jab at us, reminding residents of the importance of maintaining a positive and cooperative community spirit, and warning that disruptive elements would be dealt with decisively at the upcoming meeting. She was preloading the jury, or so she thought. She was actually just highlighting her own arrogance, making the coming reversal even more dramatic. On the day of the meeting, a palpable tension hung in the air of the small community clubhouse we used for these events. Turnout was unusually high. My quiet conversations had borne fruit. People were intrigued. They smelled blood in the water, even if they didn't know whose it was. Sarah was by my side, a little nervous but resolute. She had seen my preparation and knew this wasn't an angry outburst, but a calculated, strategic move. Beatrice sat at the head table, flanked by her timid board members, radiating an aura of smug control. She ran through the agenda treasurer's report, the landscaping committee update with her usual brisk, dismissive efficiency. She clearly expected a routine meeting where she would rubber stamp her own agenda and perhaps publicly shame a homeowner or two to reinforce her dominance. My hands were steady as I held my folder. Inside was my script, my presentation on a USB drive, and the stack of handouts. I felt a surge of cold confidence. This was no different from presenting a boundary dispute analysis to a panel of skeptical federal judges. In fact, it was easier. The evidence was simpler, and the villain was more cartoonish. Finally, she reached the last item on the agenda. New business, she announced, a hint of boredom in her voice. Does anyone have any new business to bring before the board? This was my cue. I stood up slowly. Yes, Madam President, I do. All eyes in the room swiveled to me. Beatrice's expression soured slightly, annoyed by the interruption to her smooth-running ceremony. Very well, Mr. Stevens. The floor is yours. Please be brief. I walked to the front of the room, my footsteps echoing in the suddenly silent space. Thank you, I began, my voice calm and measured. I won't take up too much of your time. I'd like to talk about the foundation of our community. I'm not talking about spirit or harmony. I'm talking about the literal ground beneath our feet and the rules that govern it. I plugged the USB drive into the projector. The first slide appeared on the screen behind Beatrice. It was the beautiful, historic 1,952 hand-drawn map of the area before Lakeview existed. This, I said, is where it all began. I could see Beatrice shift in her chair, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. This wasn't the angry rant about a cheeseburger that she was expecting. This was something else entirely, and she didn't know the script. The trap was laid, the audience was seated, and the curtain was about to rise. I let the image of the old pastoral map hang in the air for a moment, letting the residents absorb the history. Beatrice watched me, her arms crossed, her expression a mixture of impatience and suspicion. She was still confident, still believed this was some petty grievance I was attempting to air, as I was preparing for some landscaping on my own property. I continued, my voice even and conversational. I did what any diligent homeowner would do. I researched the history of the land titles and surveys in our area. It's a fascinating history, full of hard-working farmers and visionary developers. And like any history, it has details that can sometimes be overlooked. I clicked to the next slide. It showed the 1,952 easement document the certified stamp from the county clerk clearly visible. I zoomed in on the key text. For example, in 1952, a permanent public access recreation easement was granted to the people of this county. It established a 20-foot wide public right-of-way to the lake. The legal principle is runs with the land, meaning it doesn't expire or get erased when the land is sold or subdivided. A low murmur went through the room. This was new information to everyone. Beatrice's expression remained frozen, but I could see a subtle tightening around her eyes. She still didn't see the full picture. My next click was the first part of the reveal. A new map appeared on the screen. The 1968 subdivision plat overlaid with a faint outline of the 1952 easement. When our beautiful Lakeview community was platted in 1968, I explained, this prior easement was, it seems, inadvertently omitted from the new developer's map. A simple oversight, perhaps. But legally, the original easement remains in full force. The county has confirmed this. The murmuring grew louder. I saw Arthur, the HOA secretary, lean forward, his eyes wide. He was starting to connect the dots. Now, for the final, devastating reveal. So, the natural question is, where is this public right-of-way today? I said, posing the question to the room. Using modern GIS mapping technology and certified county data, I've plotted its exact course. I clicked the remote. The screen changed to the high-resolution satellite image of the community. Then, with another click, a brilliant red semi-transparent corridor animated across the screen, starting from the old oak tree on the main road. The red line sliced across two other properties before landing squarely, undeniably, on Lot 12. It ran directly through the center of Beatrice Cromwell's immaculate prize-winning rose garden and passed directly underneath the corner of her beloved gazebo. A collective gasp swept through the clubhouse. People started turning to look at Beatrice, whose face had gone from smug to shocked to a ghastly pale white. Her mouth was slightly agape. I let the image linger, the bright red scar of public land cutting through her private paradise. As you can see, I said, my voice dropping to a more serious, deliberate tone, the public easement, a legal right-of-way for any resident of this county, runs directly through the property of our HOA president. I turned to face Beatrice directly. Now, this brings me to the topic of rules. Madam President, you recently sent me this letter. I held up her condescending response to my inquiry, in which you state, and I quote, "The community's integrity depends on the unwavering enforcement of these rules, and that any encroachment, no matter how minor, will be met with immediate fines and sanctions. Is that correct?" She was speechless, sputtering. This is an outrage. This is a personal attack." "It's not a personal attack, Beatrice," I said calmly, using her first name for the first time. "It's a presentation of public records. In fact, it's a matter of absolute adherence to regulations. A phrase I believe you used when you forced the board to deny Arthur Miller's request for a tool shed because it was 2 inches over the setback line." Arthur's head snapped up. Several other residents who had been on the receiving end of her petty enforcement exchanged knowing glances. The tide of public opinion was turning, and it was turning fast. I gestured back to the screen. Arthur's shed would have been a minor violation of an internal HOA bylaw. This, I said, pointing to her gazebo sitting on the red corridor, is a major encroachment on a permanent public right-of-way recorded with the county. It's a violation not just of our community's supposed principles of fairness, but of public law. I picked up the stack of handouts. "I've prepared a summary for everyone," I announced, and Sarah and I began passing them out. "It includes the map, the relevant legal citations, and copies of the correspondence I've mentioned." The room devolved into a flurry of activity as people grabbed the sheets and began to read. The evidence was in their hands. It was simple, clear, and damning. Beatrice slammed her hand on the table, finding her voice at last. "This is a farce! You have no right! I will sue you for slander, for harassment!" George, the man whose grandchild's tricycle had earned him a fine, stood up. "Slander, Beatrice? He's showing us public records. Is the map wrong? Is that not your gazebo?" She glared at him, her authority crumbling before her eyes. "This meeting is adjourned," she shrieked, but it was too late. I held up a hand. According to Section 4, Paragraph C of the HOA bylaws, a motion from the floor to remove a board member for cause can be brought to a vote at any scheduled meeting with a quorum present. I believe we have a quorum. The dam had broken. The carefully constructed facade of Beatrice Cromwell's power, built on fear, hypocrisy, and beige mailboxes, was collapsing in real time, right in front of everyone she had lorded it over for years. And all because she couldn't stand the thought of a neighbor simply wanting to read a book in peace. The moment I called for a vote to remove her, the room erupted. It was no longer a structured meeting, but a raw, cathartic outpouring of years of pent-up frustration. People were on their feet, talking over each other, pointing at the screen, at their handouts, and at a stunned Beatrice. Her shrieked "meeting adjourned" was utterly ignored. The power had shifted from the head table to the floor, and she was no longer in control. "A vote? This is preposterous," Beatrice stammered, her face a blotchy crimson. She looked to her fellow board members for support, but they wouldn't meet her eyes. They were staring at their own copies of the handout, the gears of self-preservation turning in their minds. They knew a sinking ship when they saw one. Arthur Miller, the man denied his shed, was the first to find a calm voice amidst the chaos. He stood up, holding his hand out. "Madam President," he said, the title now dripping with irony, "Mr. Stevens raises a very serious point. According to our own bylaws, which you have always insisted we follow to the letter, a board member must act in good faith and avoid any conflict of interest or appearance of impropriety. Building your own private structure on a public easement while fining others for trivial infractions seems to be the very definition of impropriety. I second the motion for a vote on your removal." Another resident, Mrs. Gable from Lot 6, stood up. "I support that." She sent me 3 letters because my welcome mat had a picture of a sunflower on it. Said it wasn't a neutral-toned entryway, my welcome mat. The floodgates opened. One by one, residents aired their grievances, not as angry rants, but as evidence. The tricycle, the wind chimes, the color of a garden hose, each one was a brick in the wall of her petty tyranny. And now that wall was coming down. The mood wasn't just angry, it was energized. It was the feeling of a populace, liberating itself. Beatrice, seeing her support evaporate, resorted to threats. "You'll all regret this. I have lawyers. This association will be buried in legal fees." I stepped forward again, my voice cutting through the noise. "There will be no need for that, Beatrice. This isn't an HOA matter anymore. The evidence I presented tonight will be formally submitted to the county's Code Enforcement Office tomorrow morning. They will handle the matter of the illegal encroachment on the public easement. My motion here tonight is strictly about your fitness to serve on this board, based on your demonstrated hypocrisy and abuse of power against the members of this community." That single statement sealed her fate. By framing it as a county-level legal issue, I had made it clear that her fight wasn't with me anymore, but with a government entity. The HOA members were now simply deciding if they wanted to keep a leader who was about to be in a public, embarrassing legal battle with the county. The vote was a landslide. It wasn't even close. By a show of hands, nearly every person in the room voted for her immediate removal. Her own board members, seeing the overwhelming tide, reluctantly raised their hands as well. Just like that, in the space of 15 minutes, her reign was over. She sat there, utterly defeated, as the acting vice president formally recorded the vote. There was no rage left, just a hollow, humiliated silence. She gathered her papers, refusing to look at anyone, and walked out of the clubhouse, the door closing with a soft click behind her. The sound was met with a moment of stunned silence, followed by a spontaneous round of applause. It wasn't just for me, it was for themselves. They had stood up to a bully and won. The downfall was swift and systematic. The following week, I filed my report with the county. As predicted, they sent an inspector, who confirmed my findings. Beatrice received a formal order to remove all obstructions, the gazebo, the rose bushes, the pristine lawn from the 20-foot public easement within 90 days, at her own expense. The cost of dismantling her monument to herself was astronomical. Her prized garden was dug up, the gazebo was torn down, and the county even installed two small, discreet signs: public shoreline access. Her legal threats were empty bluster. Her lawyers likely told her she had no case. She became a pariah. Neighbors who once feared her now openly ignored her. Her power was gone, and without it, she was just a lonely woman in a big house with a muddy scar running through her yard. The public humiliation was her ultimate punishment. She had built her identity on being the Queen of Lakeview, and now her castle had been breached and her crown taken. The aftermath of Beatrice's spectacular public downfall was like the calm after a long, oppressive storm. A new interim HOA board was formed, led by the previously timid Arthur Miller, who turned out to have a surprising knack for fair-minded, common-sense leadership. The first thing the new board did was declare a fine amnesty, voiding all of the petty, punitive fines Beatrice had levied over the past year. It was a symbolic gesture, but a powerful one. It was a declaration that the era of tyranny by newsletter was over. The broader impact on the community was profound. People started talking to each other more. There was a sense of shared victory and camaraderie. The annual neighborhood barbecue, which had been a stuffy, tense affair under Beatrice's watch, became a genuinely fun potluck. George brought his grandkids, and their tricycle sat proudly on the grass without fear of reprisal. The Miller family hung a new set of wind chimes, and their gentle sound was a reminder of our newfound freedom. For Sarah and me, the change was most welcome. Our cabin on the lake was once again our sanctuary. We could sit on our deck in peace, the only sounds being the lapping of the water and the distant laughter of neighbors. The ugly cloud of harassment was gone. Sarah, who had been the catalyst for the whole affair, felt a quiet sense of vindication. She hadn't sought this fight, but seeing justice prevail, not through anger but through intelligence and preparation, had restored her sense of safety and belonging. As for Beatrice, her retreat was total. The for sale sign went up on her lawn about 6 months after the gazebo came down. The story of her downfall had become a local legend, and I suspect the humiliation was too much to bear. She sold the house at a loss, the marred landscaping and the now clearly marked public easement having taken a toll on its curb appeal, and moved away. We never heard from her again. I sometimes reflect on the whole bizarre episode, from the 911 call over a cheeseburger to the final, victorious HOA meeting. The lesson I learned wasn't just about standing up to bullies. It was about how you stand up to them. Beatrice, like many petty tyrants, built her power on a foundation of perceived authority and the assumption that nobody would ever bother to read the fine print. She wielded rules she barely understood and counted on fear and apathy to protect her. The moment she was confronted with someone who had done their homework, who understood the system better than she did, her entire power structure crumbled. Anger and shouting would have gotten me nowhere. It would have just played into her narrative of me being a disruptive element. But overwhelming, meticulously documented, and publicly presented competence? That was a weapon she had no defense against. True power doesn't come from a title like HOA president or the ability to levy fines. It comes from knowledge, from understanding the rules of the game so well that you can use them to ensure a fair outcome for everyone. My specialized skill set as a geospatial analyst, something that seems esoteric to most, became the great equalizer. It allowed me to fight back not by lowering myself to her level, but by elevating the fight to a level of factual certainty she simply couldn't reach. So, if there's a moral to this story, it's this: never underestimate the power of being prepared. When you're faced with an injustice, big or small, don't just get mad. Get smart. Do the research. Read the bylaws. Check the public records. Build your case with undeniable facts. More often than not, the bullies of the world are standing on very shaky ground. All it takes is one person with a good map to show everyone exactly where the cracks are. Have you ever had to use your own unique skill to solve a problem someone else's arrogance created? Let me know in the comments below. It's stories like these that remind us that with a little ingenuity, justice is something we can build for ourselves.